All right, good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday, September 13th, 2022. This is a special meeting of the Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach. We are live in City Hall, Commissioners' Room on the second floor. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9:05 a.m. We'll start off with a roll call. Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Shanowski.
Here.
Commissioner Susan Gay.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
And Mayor Stan Mills. We have a full complement of the mayor and commissioners, and therefore we have a quorum and are able to formally conduct business today. I'd also like to identify staff members that are here today, and that is City Secretary Ann Womack, City Arborist Liz Lingo, Interim City Manager Evan Miller, and City Solicitor Glenn Mandalis. Thank you all for being here. I'd also like to thank everybody that's watching virtually. We're glad you're joining us, and I want to thank the one person we have so far in person for being here today. She's been a major contributor throughout this whole tree process. I'd also like to have a reminder that documents that support agenda items, when they're available, are embedded into the agenda. Go to the online portal for the city's website and seek out today's agenda, and in there you'll be able to find the support documents, which include correspondence and the final draft, hopefully final draft of the tree ordinance that we'll be discussing today. With that, we'll go to the correspondence. The only thing that we've received has been embedded in the agenda from Carolyn Diefendorfer, who is also here with us today. And want to remind ourselves that the purpose of this special meeting today is to discuss tree code revisions, including but not limited to the appeals process, fees, mitigation, and minimum tree requirements, to focus on finalizing proposal for tree code revision. Before we get started in there, I'd like to explain for those that are watching this in the future, recorded, that we had a very severe storm last night, which took out a lot of trees, did a lot of tree damage. One arborist called me and indicated he thought it was an inline windstorm with winds up to 100 miles an hour. But I'd like to give City Manager Evan Miller time to tell us his observations and what we're doing to address it.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, members of the public, and all of those watching. So as the Mayor indicated, we had a storm come through early this morning, as I'm sure most of us were aware. Storm began at least hitting us pretty hard around 5 o'clock, 5:05 this morning. Started with some serious lightning and thunder, which then transitioned into rain and then extremely heavy rain, followed by that very strong winds. We had a call with the National Weather Service this morning. They reported approximately 60 to 70 mile per hour wind gusts. They were straight line winds, and reason for that, for the estimate of 60 to 70 mile per hour winds, is that's generally when trees become uprooted, which we did have several of those around town. The storm did come from the west and moved east over the Rehoboth Beach area. As the Mayor indicated, we had significant tree damage around town. We had downed trees along Scarborough, Hickman, Park, the entire Schoolview area, Rehoboth Avenue, and certainly elsewhere. Several streets also became flooded, notably State Road. So some vehicles had some difficulty crossing the road early in the morning. The power was out on Rehoboth Avenue, North First Street, Country Club, and other areas as well. We also had a tree that fell on power lines on Hickman Street. Delmarva Power is currently estimating power returns by mid to late morning. They initially had approximately 1,500 customers without service due to tree damage, which caused the substation breaker to open. But currently, they've resolved that issue, and approximately 25 people in Rehoboth Beach are without power at the moment. So they'll continue to clean up and have that issue resolved this morning. DelDOT is also on site addressing certain issues. I've seen a number of arborists and tree service companies out as well. Rehoboth Avenue Extended is closed at the moment due to downed trees. Most of the debris, though, has been removed, but the road remains closed, so the road should be opened up shortly. Our public works crews, water, streets, other departments that have equipment are out cleaning up the streets and other debris from public property. Wanted to mention that any property owners that do have debris and limbs can put them at the curb, and as we make our rounds around town, we will pick those up. Any large limbs, if property owners could try and cut them down to 8 feet, that would be ideal. Again, but to bring that debris and limbs to the curb, and we'll take care of that throughout the day and throughout this week. And we'll be around to address that. So all I ask is just to please be patient with us. We've got a lot to address. We've taken care of a lot of it this morning, and we'll continue to work on it today. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. I would like to say I received a call from Evan early this morning, very early, and not long after all this happened. So I wanted to applaud him and his crews. As I walked around town and drove around town surveying things, I got a lot of people stop me, complimenting the city and the public works crew for their diligence and being out there so early addressing everything. So passing that on to you, Evan. Thank you. Any further questions from the city manager? Because he's going to be leaving us shortly to go continue work on this. Commissioner Sharp?
I just had one question. How are we going to share some of the important pieces for people who are not here? Evan, like the debris can be put at the curb if it's a reasonable size. How will that be communicated for folks that aren't listening in this morning?
Sure. I will talk to Lynn about that. We did do, most of you might have received the beacon alert. If you're signed up for those, we did send out an alert early this morning, I think around 6:45. So we will likely reissue another alert with updates, and we can include that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll start business. I'm going to start with a preface that I usually do, and that's just a reminder that this tree code review has been going on for many years, and it has not been a simple task, as simple as taking a code and doing a red line version, crossing out deletions and putting in additions. This is, I think safely we can say, a total rewrite. Is there any guess on how much difference there is here? Is this like 80% rewrite, you think?
Maybe.
Maybe. There's a lot of rewritten in it. So the point is, as you read it and you look at red line versions, they just relate to the changes from a previous meeting, not from the beginning of time. Also like to go over with you the possible time schedule here. Again, we've been working on this for a long, long time. I'm hopeful that today we come and create a final version that will just be all black and white, and that from that version, then we task Glenn with doing a full legal review of it for everything, wordsmithing, syntax, clarity, and all that stuff. So I want to give you plenty of time to do that. At the same time, concurrently, I would like to distribute this final version, if that's where we get today, this final version, and advertise it to the people that we get it in the hands of the tree vendors, especially, but also remind the public that this is the last version. And again, give them plenty of time. Then depending on the response we get back from the tree people and the public on this final version, we may possibly hold one more meeting in November, workshop, and then conduct a final meeting to vote on this in the November regular meeting. That's what I'm hoping for the longest time frame that we would have. We have been calling the final meeting a public hearing, and I want to remind everybody this is not in the zoning code, so it's not an official public hearing that we need to vote on a resolution, adopt a resolution. Setting a public hearing is really been called, I think Susan initiated this, it's been called a public hearing to give it more weight. That's simply what we're trying to do. This is very important. We've worked on it a long time, and we really want to try to get the attention of everybody and so that they all buy into it. With that, Susan, you have provided another support document, and I can put some of that online when appropriate, and we'll let you take it over.
Okay, thanks. First of all, I think it's somewhat ironic that we're here today finalizing the tree ordinance after what happened just a few hours ago, and I can't help but think that the tree gods have spoken, but I just don't quite know what they're saying. But they've clearly weighed in on this subject. First of all, I'm pleased last week when all this came together. It was really nice for me and I hope for you all to see it this close to being all black and white with very little redlining in it. And so I do have some comments to make about those few areas that remain, and some of them are quite minor. And in addition to that, however, there's always something, and I feel like I'm too close to it, and I miss some of these things. So I appreciate Carolyn Diefendorfer sending us her comments, because she caught a few things I had not caught. And so I've made a list. Most of these things are, I would hope, are very minor. And so in the interest of getting the version distributed to the public and to the tree companies, I guess I'm hoping that what comes out of this meeting in terms of corrections are just that. There are small corrections that I can make and then get the final document to you and to Glenn for review. Okay? Do you want me just to go ahead and start?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Well, there's nothing on page 1 out of 19, so we're off to a good start. But on page 2, and I should have caught this before, lines 59 and 60, where we left off the reference number to the specific code section. So for line 59, private maintenance for trees on public land, that's 253.14. And line 60, where it talks about requiring an approved tree plan, is 253.24. So 14 and 24 are the fill-ins there. Then going on to the next page, line.
Susan, let me interrupt a minute. Yeah,
Okay.
I have found a lot of little wordsmithing things and syntax and things. I may or may not bring some up here if I find it important, but maybe it's appropriate just to forward them on to Glenn, that as he does his legal review, he can be the one to determine the proper syntax and wordsmithing. Do you have?
Nothing other than I think that's a very wise step to take, because I'm really only interested in the ones that have,
Substance.
yes, a substantive impact for commissioner discussion. Thank you much.
So you're wiping me out of like 80 comments.
Yes, that was intentional, Stan, intentional.
All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so on page 3, line 95, you'll see this is a red-line addition, and it's because we had breast height in the definitions before, but the term used throughout the acronym used throughout the code is really DBH. So, and a lot of people don't know what DBH means, so it's appropriate to have that as the definition rather than breast height. And Liz and I, she approved this definition, so it's here now.
Can we go to the definition of demolition, just while we're doing
Yes,
them in
sure.
sequence?
Yeah, that's fine.
We're doing them in sequence there. Demolition includes the destruction of all or part of a structure. I wasn't sure why it can't just stop right there. But instead it continues on, or the removal of all or part of any structure to an off-site location. I'm for simplicity, that's all.
Well, that comes straight out of the current code, so whatever you want.
And just, if Glenn would just give it thought, we don't need an answer today, right now.
No idea why you need that second section.
But also, we're going to have to, maybe we want to, when we hear back from the Planning Commission on their review of 236-30, if they create their own definition of demolition, then we may choose to use that. So there's a question mark there on it.
So for now, you want it just to say includes a destruction or all or part of a structure, period.
If Glenn deems it that.
I would say yes right here and now, because I have no idea why that second part's there unless Liz says here's.
Moving. We've had several things moved. I mean, I don't know how that would affect trees necessarily. Sorry. But like we've had houses shifted on lots. So say your house is in the middle of double lots. We've had people inquire about lifting the house and moving it to one lot. We've had sheds moved. We've had houses raised up. So that's the only reason I could think.
Well, this does not say anything about relocating on property. It has to
Says
do
an
with
off-site,
destruction
yeah.
or all or part of something. So, because it says removal to an off-site location. So, I would just ask Glenn to give additional thought to try to simplify that if we can.
And could we advance the screen to, I think it's around line 100? I don't know who's
To
doing
this,
that.
to this,
Thank you.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
So right here is where I was gonna put a period, so to speak.
Yep.
I mean, to Liz's point, you have to get a demolition permit to move a house, whether it's staying on the same property or going someplace else.
I don't know. I mean, we have a house move permit, but I'm not, that's more of a building official question.
Again, I suggest that we put a period there. I think it's apropos to all destruction or demolition on a property, and including remove. If you're removing something, even if it's a house mover, they don't destruct the house or deconstruct the house. They just lift it up and move it off there. But, and again, I think we'll probably be looking at it again within the next couple months when the Planning Commission makes their recommendation.
I wondered about that. Okay. All right. For now, we'll leave it.
Thank you.
And then the next thing I have is actually on line 209, unless somebody has something before.
I do. Line 126, 127, line tree. Any tree located on a property line. And I think Carolyn brought this up before. Is it the canopy that crosses the line? Is it the trunk? And I think we need a better definition. I don't know what it is, but I came up with, just myself real quick, a tree with any part of its trunk
Yep, that's,
below DBH sitting across a property line. In other words, a trunk on two properties. So that I think would be the
we
intent.
did talk about that, but we didn't talk about it in the context of the definition.
So, and again, I don't know if this is the right wording, but essentially, it's a tree with any part of its trunk below 4 foot 6 inches above ground, sitting across a property line.
Any parts?
Don't you normally do it right at grade, Liz? Don't you look at it at grade rather than whether it bends and part of it's now on the property line at less than 4 feet?
I think any portion of the trunk below DBH. I mean, typically the root flare is gonna be wider than the trunk. But yeah, I could see an instance in which it would go like that at 3 feet, that maybe it would be a line tree. I mean, like I said, we've talked about this before. I think the courts have really gone back and forth on that, so.
I think we need to pick something, whether it's at grade and see how that works, and test it over time, or whether it's below DBH.
Well, what do we?
But I don't see any tree located on a property line.
Yeah, interestingly,
You
the
know,
previous.
couldn't you have, Carolyn's situation where the tree trunk is actually fully on property B,
Yeah,
but it goes up, and at some point, the trunk at 5 feet high, at 10 feet high, maybe it's not the trunk, maybe it's the canopy that overhangs.
yeah, but you
That's
don't
not
count
the.
that as a line tree if
No.
if it's just the canopy, right?
That's, so like maybe a silver maple that has a
Yeah.
straight trunk for 20 feet and then starts spreading out in different directions, like with
Right.
big wide limbs.
But my
count
point
that.
is
Yeah.
our definition
Right.
clear enough?
Well, interestingly.
I don't want people asking that same question that I just did.
Yeah, so it
in the
would have,
future.
I think we could argue, like, same with the tree roots too. Just because tree roots are on your property doesn't mean that it's a line tree if we don't fix the definition. But it should be at least the trunk from grade to DBH maybe.
Okay, so how do you want to say it? With any parts of its trunk
A,
at grade?
a tree with any part of its trunk below DBH sitting across a property line.
Between the ground and
Well, that's what I say,
DBH height, yeah.
a tree with any part of its trunk below DBH sitting across a property line.
Okay.
Good to me.
So in other words,
Fine. I do want to remind you, there was a definition in the old code, and it used the word astride, and we took that out as being sort of common, and so sitting across is astride, but perhaps it's, but I agree, we need to put something back in there, so that's fine with me, yeah.
And as we're on that page, the next definition of lot, and this is a question for the solicitor, in the zoning code, we have a much more extensive definition of lot. Would it be incorrect to have, if you will, conflicting definitions? Should we not have one consistent definition throughout, since a lot is a lot with specifically coming to trees, I would think, in their use?
Yeah, so I think you can have different definitions. Of course, if you can have a consistent definition in both chapters that makes sense in both chapters, we should. Dewey Beach probably, man, it's probably been 8 or 9 years ago now. They took all of their definitions in all of their chapters and pulled them all out and made one big definition chapter. And the unintended consequences of that, because it makes sense in some chapters, a definition, but it doesn't make sense at all in a different chapter. But so consistency is always best, but we'll look at it and see if the zoning code definition of lot makes sense in the context of the tree ordinance.
Okay.
I'll take that as a note.
All right.
all right, so let's just do a page by page.
Yeah, do you have
So,
anything on page 4?
Just a general comment. We have definition of natural area at the top, and we've got the definition of park area. And it always gives me a little pause when we define things referring to people to other chapters. And maybe that's the best route, but I always think of the layperson going through here and having to look through the chapter 253, and then they've got to turn to chapter 270, and then they've got to turn to chapter 195. I don't know the prudence of repeating the definition within each code versus referencing. Do you have an opinion?
I go back and forth it because invariably, if you reference something in another part of the code, when that part of the code changes 5 years later, nobody realizes to go back here and say, oh,
got
that,
a lot of that.
right. So I mean, generally, it's better to write it out in words versus, in my view, versus just referencing a section, because that section will change. But I see it all the time, referencing
But couldn't we just have a principle that agreed to that we're going to spell it out?
Good.
Because doesn't it happen again in line 146? At the end of that line?
Yeah, but some of this is referring to details of a requirement, actually the same for natural area. When it says as further defined in 270, well, of course, 270-4 is definition, so that one I could see maybe picking up the same definition. But for line 146, when it says a tree that is necessary to meet density requirements in 253.22, that's a whole section of the code,
Yeah,
253.22.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
they're two different situations, I think, yeah. But do you like, for the situation in 139 and lines 142, would you prefer that it be spelled out?
Yes.
Well, then we can.
And could you not do a hybrid? You spell it out and also include, or as further defined in 270-4. You
Depends.
hit both cases, don't you?
If 270-4 is a definition, and it is, because that's what 270-4 is, then we might as well just pick it up and move it.
Same's true of lot. Because that's where
Okay.
natural area is 274 also.
Yeah.
That's the definitions.
Right.
So.
Glenn, some guidance there. Are you leaning 51% one way or?
So I think that I agree with Commissioner Gay that if it says it's further defined in 270-4, 270-4 is the definition section in the zoning code. So if it's literally saying go to the definition in the zoning code, we might as well just drop it here. other sections, such as 253.22, that are more extensive, it probably makes sense just to reference it. So I think I don't think you can do a one-size-fits-all.
Okay, well, and speaking of that, on the park tree, so on line 142, where it says trees in public parks as defined in 195-1. Well, 195-1 is indeed the definitions of the Parks and Recreation chapter, but it is quite detailed and it lists all the parks. So do we want to move that definition over and have it here? Or is it appropriate to say as defined in 195-1 because that's where you see a list of all the parks?
Well, now this is becoming more complicated, isn't it?
I mean, it's easy to move it over.
Because I could see, as further defined in 270-4, if it was only the definition of natural area, I would prefer to do that. Whereas the park trees, you're right, there is reference to multiple areas in there. So maybe that does need to, maybe that's more of a case like 253-22.
I think.
But isn't a park tree a city tree? Can it just all go under city trees? I mean, what's the difference between a city tree and a park tree?
You have to go back and read 195-1.
Well, they're just spelled out differently, yeah. But
So I think we need to use discretion. The preference for me would be that if it's just referring to a single definition, I'd rather see the definition incorporated into 253.
Okay. Anything else on this page?
Just have a question for Liz. Under shade tree, Liz, it says any tree of a species that is capable of attaining a height of 30 feet or more at maturity. That word capable kind of gives me a little pause. Is that any issue with you? I mean, so the tree could grow to 30 feet, but I keep it cut at 10 feet. Does that make any challenge, or is it anything worried about?
Well, I think in here we don't allow ornamental trimming. Somewhere in this code, we added that.
Right.
So I think the reason we have that in there is sometimes, even though it might say a tree gets 30 feet tall, in reality, the conditions we're planting it in, it won't.
Okay. If it doesn't give you any pause, that's fine. It's kind of a vague word, so that's fine.
Well, our residential tree list that's pending, will that have asterisks identifying shade trees or specific trees?
Yeah, I think the idea was to have like two separate columns of trees. So one would be the ones, the native shade trees, and the other column would be everything else that was permitted.
Anything else on this page?
No, but while we're on it, do you mind me pausing a minute? There's a lot of reference in here to the residential tree list.
I was going to bring that up.
And you want to bring that up later or bring it up now? 'Cause-
Actually, let me bring it up later because I can tell you why it's come up.
Okay, and then, because
When we get to that.
I will continue my thought later.
Okay.
All right.
Because if we make a change in the title, it'll be just a global change wherever it's referred to. Okay. Anything I have something then on page 5, line 209. I just noticed that the wording is not consistent with elsewhere in the code. It says the term of 5 persons to be appointed by the mayor shall be 3 years, and then further down, it says if there's a successor, that shall be appointed by the mayor with the approval of the city commissioners. And in the language for the Board of Adjustment, it says that those 5 members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by a majority of all commissioners. So I just wondered if that should be consistently worded, since these are appointments.
Yes, confirmed is usually what's used.
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so I'll incorporate the Board of Adjustment language on that one. Okay.
Right above that, if you would, I would just like you to review.
Right.
Susan, would you just like to review for us lines 205, the new composition of the thing?
Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me of that. Yes,
5 members,
yes.
resident, that is a
Right.
big change from
Yeah,
before.
sorry. That's been in there for so long because Law Oversight actually put this in, that I forgot about it.
Could we advance to 205? The line on the screen?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Okay.
So the current code requires members of Parks and Shade Tree to be full-time domiciled residents of the city, just as it with Board of Adjustment. However, we're going to change that now so that the commission is open to residents and property owners, similar to the way, the Planning Commission is, for example. And I think that will open up opportunities for more people to serve on Parks and Shade Tree, and there's no reason that they have to be full-time residents, so.
Okay, but I'm just reviewing, unlike the Animal Issues Committee that allow, or Animal Issues or Environment Committee that allow non-residents to be members, this does not allow,
Right, it's residents or property
allow
owners of the city.
people outside of the
Right.
city.
And is that clear from there? Where
I
it
think
says
so.
residents or property owners?
Residents or property owners. So it doesn't have to be a resident, have to own property, but if you're neither a resident and you don't own property, you cannot be on the commission.
Right.
Isn't is that at the discretion of the mayor, though? Because for animal issues, for instance, I don't think it's written, I just think that's how we've
We
operated.
either codified
Yeah,
that or had a
there-
policy.
Yeah, there is a policy on who
Individual.
can be on individual
Okay.
committees.
I was already there. Okay. Okay.
So that takes care of 205, so I'm happy there.
Anything else on this page?
Nothing.
I do, and I think this is more for the solicitor. Line 221, it says, "Of this chapter will result in unnecessary hardships or exceptional practical difficulties." I believe that's language from Board of Adjustments, or that's the phrase used. Is that defined anywhere, or is it intentionally vague, or curious as to why that language appears here?
So this is language that very much tracks the Board of Adjustment
Right.
Language. In the context of the Board of Adjustment, of course, there's, a case after a case that describes what is a hardship or an exceptional practical difficulty. This language isn't something that is commonly found in tree ordinances, because I think tree ordinances are a little bit of a different animal, and the appeals process you find in every tree ordinance is a little bit different. They're not, Boards of Adjustment are set up by state law. This language is used in state law. It's the same language that's repeated in every municipality's code practically. So I think that, my presumption is that a court would look to Boards of Adjustment for interpreting this language. So we could come up with other words to try to describe it, but I think that I would rather rely upon what's been established through case law. We could make reference in here, to say something, I probably want to think twice about whether I really want to reference Boards of Adjustment in this section. But I think the language, those terms are adequately defined in the context of Boards of Adjustment. It's just a matter of whether it would be transferable to
Well, and if
tree
it
code.
says, I think, if our memory serves me, we've been doing this for a while, but this came up when we were possibly considering putting this into the zoning code.
Right.
So that it had a different teeth, or because the Parks and Shade Tree Commission would really act as a Board of Adjustments or that role. So if the language still is in there that, in the fact that we're not going that direction, that's fine, but I just wanted to kind of flag it. I didn't know if it was leftover language or intended to stay there.
It's intended, but
Okay.
let me take that as a note just to look at it again, because I agree with you that it's not a Board of Adjustment, and that those terms have been defined in the context of Boards of Adjustment. So we should give it one more thought. So I'll take that as a note to give it one more look.
And then also there, in the next paragraph, I can, the commission shall review an annual status report of the urban forest plan and prepared by the city arborist, and data to include, et cetera. Is there any need, and I'll ask really Liz on this, is there any need that we define in there that a time of the year that should be prepared, so that basically we have a schedule, or that it's always in the fall or the spring, or does it need any of that kind of direction so that we know that that's going to occur on a regular basis, that the Parks and Shade Tree Commission can be preparing themselves for it, much as we do with the CDP. Annual update is always done at a time of the year. I just don't know if it's necessary or not, but it's always nice to be able to give some people some goals or responsibilities to match or to follow.
I don't really have a specific viewpoint on that. Whatever is put in there is fine with me. I've never even seen that in a tree code before, so to have that requirement of the city for the city is a new one for me.
You want to add a January date to it, or pick a date, or just,
It seems like to me it would make sense to have our urban forest plan review prior to planting seasons.
So, but there's
So
two
you could
planting
make decisions based on,
Yeah, but there's two planting seasons, right? Spring and fall.
yes, yes.
So then you would do it before the spring one, you're saying?
But to follow that thought process, I always think that planting season, fall or spring, but with regards to budget, so
Yeah,
that we can
right.
appropriate money for this.
Okay, then let's align it with the budget. How about that?
October,
No,
November?
You mean the budget approval?
Well, budget approval was made, but I mean, in the process of setting the budget,
Oh, right, okay.
the discussions
well,
begin October, November.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah,
Yeah, it's like a year and a half in advance.
Yeah.
right.
October, November?
I don't think it really matters in the
Okay,
grand
but
scheme.
Again, I just want to
Yeah.
So do we want to say?
give them a goal, if you will.
Yeah, whatever you guys want to put in there is fine. I just, in terms of tying it to the budget calendar year, I don't think any of that's imperative because we do the budget so far in advance that, like, say we had a discussion of this plan in November, well, by the time we finalize things, it would be.
So,
do you want to have a discussion with the Parks and Shade Tree Commission and make a recommendation, or do we want to?
I mean, would this happen potentially this November?
This is not going to get approved until November, so I would think not.
Well, there's no process in here as to how we're doing this, and usually there's a lot of public feedback opportunities when you write plans like that.
Right.
Okay, so we're talking about November of '23.
But do we want to
October,
put the
November
date in the
23.
code, or do we want to just have that as a policy, or in the plan itself? I don't know.
Liz, do you currently, this is currently in the code, correct?
Nope.
Oh,
No,
it is
it's
No,
not.
this is new.
Is the definition there always, or is it also new, the
No, it's
urban
new.
Yeah.
forest plan?
It's new.
Well, I think if you want some routineness to this, every 12 months with exactitude, then you put a date in there. If you're comfortable with it stretching out to 15 months 1 year and 12 months and 20 months, then I would leave it alone.
But Liz,
I think a date.
it's the city arborist's responsibility to prepare the urban forest plan, correct?
That's what it says.
Okay.
Well,
If you
if
wanna
that,
present
wait a
it-
minute, if that's what it says, then Liz, that's what it means. So let me just get clear.
So,
that-
so I should schedule my vacation when it's planned to be presented, is what I'm hearing.
I think the reason you're being asked is you might
help you
want to
here, Liz, come
consider,
One person, Tony?
the reason I think you're being asked for your opinion is you might want to consider workload during specific times of the year, the budget cycle, et cetera. Which one is best?
We're busy all year round.
Okay.
You know this.
I'm not,
I'm not trying to be intentionally difficult. I honestly, it's no problem. Whatever time of the year you guys want it to be done, we'll make it happen. It's just the initial needs to be addressed. So, like, if we already had one in place right now that had been improved, vetted, gone through public approval and all that, commissioners had approved, we could say annually,
right.
and it wouldn't be a problem. But since we don't have one, that's why I'm struggling with giving anybody a time frame. What if it takes 2 years to do this whole writing, approval, public process? So then we're saying it has to be annually.
Well, wouldn't you want this to come before the budget session? So you want it to be resolved and presented before, say, November, when they're starting?
And it says the commission, this is the Parks and Shade Tree Commission,
Yeah.
Correct.
correct?
So
But
you could simply preface that to be with, in March annually, the commission shall review an annual status or something like that.
We also have to keep in mind, urban forest plan is not necessarily a 1-2 year plan. So it's not a work plan. It's an overarching thing, kind of like the CDP, but on a much smaller scale just for trees. So we don't do the CDP and then it says redo Scarborough Avenue road paving. It might have a goal of develop annual paving plan or something like that. And that's how the urban forest plan is. So I don't think it's imperative that it ties into the budget process, timing wise.
So let me go down the rabbit hole just a minute more, if I may. Sorry. But it then, to continue your responsibility as outlined, says that the report shall include the number of property owners, builders that were granted, denied a tree removal permit and rationale, tree removal permit granted, denied, and rationale under an appeal, and trees replaced and locations. Do you have the capability to gather that information and present in a report currently?
Well, let me read it for a second. Almost, yes. The rationale isn't, I don't know how that would be documented in a munis report. But everything else, like numbers and addresses, yes. We can pull that.
So if that could be produced every October.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so we just say annual report in October?
So started off with, in October annually, the commission shall review. Is that all right?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
And then on the next page, down on line 259, you'll see the red type there for public right-of-way. That is actually an editing change that came from Wallace Montgomery. They had made a few changes. You all got the memo from them, and this was one of them. And Glenn agreed that we should add that. The thing is, though, I don't know that do we define right-of-way anywhere in the code?
I don't know if it's defined in the zoning code or not.
Yeah, the only place I can find it is in the reference to automobile vehicles and traffic. So that's right of way. It's not even public right of way. So.
I remember when we were doing 5G, I looked for right-of-way definition and that would compare with other cities, and I couldn't find it.
No.
Okay. So and we didn't add one then? We didn't have one for the wireless?
We didn't, I don't think.
Okay. So should we? I guess that's the question.
I think we need a real definition of right-of-way, rights-of-way, and how we deal with that. We have utility poles, we have lots of stuff in our right-of-way.
Well, and Glenn, would you take a look at the need for defining public right-of-way and right-of-way within 253, within Chapter 270, the site plan, any other codes, period?
And then within that same paragraph also, Glenn, the line 262, just the phrase, adequate maintenance for all city parks and trees, except as otherwise provided by law. That otherwise, except as otherwise provided by law. Does that refer to city law? Does that refer, that's 262?
Yeah, I mean, it typically would mean any law that would prevent it, but whether it be city, county, state, federal.
Okay.
But so shall be responsible for the city to provide adequate maintenance. Yeah, I mean, so if there's some environmental reg that wouldn't allow her to do some sort of maintenance on a tree that otherwise she'd be required to do, then that's basically giving her the out. So
Okay.
I think it's fine. I mean, it means any law.
Next thing I have is.
I'm sorry, I have one thing on that page.
Yeah.
Question for the city arborist. Page 269, any tree removed from city-owned property must be replaced in a location approved by the city arborist. Does this mean if you deem a city tree needs to come down and have it removed, it needs to be replaced? Or if a private property owner is asking to take down a city tree, it has to be replaced.
I don't know. I don't think it's clear.
Well, in practicality right now, if you deem a tree needs to come down for whatever reason, do you replace that tree?
In the exact same spot, typically not right away, no.
But you do replace them, right?
Yeah, but like if we're taking down one tree on Olive Street,
Right.
I don't go and put one tree right back.
Right, but it doesn't say it has to be in the same location, just replaced in a location approved by the city arborist. So it just means that if you take one out, you're replacing it somewhere, right? I mean, the data certainly suggests that we're replacing city trees more than what we're taking out.
Oh, no, we are. I don't think, as per the commissioner's question, I don't think it's clear which
Yeah, I get
way.
it,
I
I
mean,
get it,
it
yeah.
would be kind of strange if I think it's more referring to private property removing street trees, because why would I remove a tree
Right.
for the city and then have to approve my own replanting? That sounds kind of silly, but it doesn't clearly say. So any tree removed from city-owned property by private property owner, I mean,
Well, but you'd be in the loop if a private property owner wanted to remove a tree from city property. So it seems
Yes.
like to me, this is chasing its tail, but, you know.
And I might be going off a little bit, but let me just throw an example at you. We were looking at doing that sidewalk curb project at Grove and Columbia. And one of the options, we would have needed to take out 2 city trees.
I think those are line trees, but maybe, okay,
Okay, but
besides the point.
let's just say that they're city trees. So let's, I think we're saving those now, but had we gone with the sidewalk and removed those 2 trees, do you put those on a list and be like, oh my God, I've got to replace 2 trees someplace else this year?
No.
So doesn't that make it a little hypocritical that we're asking homeowners to do something that we're not doing as a city?
But in a way we are, because we're planting 3 times the amount of trees we're removing. So if it's a street tree that like has a plaque under it that has to go back, then yes, I keep track of what's removed and where, but not in the manner in which you're suggesting by any means.
So you're saying that we don't keep track of it, but we by far plant way more trees each year than we're taking out.
We do keep track of it in terms of like an inventory. So I know what spaces are vacant, which ones have stumps, which ones have trees that are not in great condition. So I can go through at any time and pull when certain trees were removed from certain spots and do that in terms of like an annual planting plan. But like say I look at a street and I can see that we're gonna have 3 to 4 trees that need to be removed in the next couple of years, but we're gonna do them one at a time as it becomes necessary because we wanna preserve them. I'm not going to take one out, put one in the next year, take one out, put one in the next year. We'll take them out over the period of those 4 years and then replace with 4, 10, 20 trees at one pop, right? So think of like Bayard Avenue. Or Bayard, if we want to get in that argument. The center strip with all the cherries that are past their prime. If you really start counting the numbers, we've removed, since before I started, about 1/3 of them. It still looks okay, doesn't look great. It needs to all be redone. I'm not gonna start piecemeal planting random trees in open pockets. We're gonna wait until we're 2/3 gone, remove them and start anew, or at least that would be the idea, if that makes any sense in terms of the grand scheme. So that's how we try to do public
Helpful for
plantings.
me.
Yeah, so
I would,
think like bigger picture. So we're dealing with 1 square mile, residents are dealing with 5,000 square feet. So
the only thing I would say for that 269 is I think it needs to be clear that if a property owner, if one of our residents comes to the city to say, hey, I want to move this street tree for whatever reason, the expectation is it needs to be replaced at a location that you deem And I'm not sure that that's clear.
Well,
here.
it seems,
Let's let Glenn, is that clear now?
no, it's not clear at all. Right now, it seems to me that if she removes a tree from city property, she needs to replace it. So I would move that sentence into subsection C, which says, no person shall plant, spray, preserve, prune, remove, cut above ground or otherwise disturb any tree on any street or city-owned property without first receiving permission from the city arborist. Any tree removed from city-owned property must be replaced in a location approved by the city arborist. So I think we're talking about private property owners. So I think.
I think that, yeah, that makes sense moving that sentence.
Okay.
And it is current, that line is in some shape or form currently in the code.
Yeah.
It's just in a different, it's more related to the park and shade tree decision now, which is pretty much what they do. We look at a street tree removal for a new curb cut, right? We want them to generally put that tree back if there's room in that location. If there's not, then they don't require them to replant it.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right, so we just move
Carolyn, make sure you just raise your hand anytime. We're not intending to wait till the end. We'd rather do them when we come to them, if you would. Susan, I'd like to go to line 274. See if I'm on the right or wrong wavelength with lines 274, 5, and 6. First of all, it says adjacent property owners. I don't know why the word adjacent there. Why wouldn't it just start with property owners may plant street trees? But then I'm having a little trouble with that. May plant street trees where? Can they plant a street tree down the street in front of their neighbor's house?
That's why it says adjacent.
Yeah.
mean,
We've had problems with that before.
Yeah, that's why.
Well, I guess the
Oh, but you're
The-
reading it
the-
as this property owner and this property owner are adjacent. They're reading it as a person who owns property here that's adjacent to
Yeah, that is
property,
how I
this,
read
the
it,
street
yeah.
property.
well, I'd like to see it clarified. You know, the property owners may plant street trees in front of their own property.
I think if you just move the word adjacent, so it says property owners may plant adjacent street trees. I think
might
that
work.
would clear
Yeah,
it up.
That would work. Does that work?
Well, in an adjacent street tree on my neighbor's property that's next door to me?
No, it's the city property that's adjacent to your property, is how I would read it. But if you're reading it a different way, then maybe it needs to be
I'm
clarified.
still reading it a little differently, that's all.
Longitude versus latitude. Front versus side.
I also have a problem with it because it doesn't have any statement about the city approving it. I think that would cut out a lot of neighbor issues.
Well, it says it says they have to enter into a written agreement with the city.
That doesn't say, to me, that doesn't mean the city has approval of tree species, locations, et cetera.
I'm still looking for black and white. Property owners may plant street trees in front of their own property.
Well, if we have with city approval, we would always ensure, I would always ensure, like somebody wanted to plant one kind of between their house and their neighbors, and I said, if your neighbor's in agreement with it, that's perfectly fine with us. So if the city has control over that, we can make sure that the neighbor agrees.
Okay, so tell me what you would do. Are you gonna leave it alone? Are you gonna,
Well, I do like the idea of maybe moving the word adjacent to define street trees. But then, to get to Liz's point about approval, it could then say, provided the selection of said trees is in accordance with 253(9) through 13 of this article, approved by the city arborist and the property owner enters into a written agreement. Would that do it?
Or property owners may plant adjacent street trees with city approval, comma, provided the selection.
I would add it, I would add the city approval where Liz just mentioned it. It's more clear that way.
restate it slowly.
Property owners may plant adjacent street trees, say it,
May plant adjacent street trees with city approval, provided that the selection and location of the said trees is in accordance.
okay, with city approval, okay.
Also,
I think we have city comment or
Yes.
resident comment.
Yeah.
Your name and relationship to the city, go ahead.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. What if you just start this out with city approval so that there's no question? You know, property owners may plant street trees adjacent to their property, provided that the selection and location of said trees is in accordance with blah, blah, blah. If you get the with city approval at the very beginning, there's no question about,
But reference the city arborist, right? Upon approval of the city arborist,
Yeah.
comma, property owners may plant adjacent street trees, comma, provided, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
Okay.
That works.
So upon approval of the city arborist, okay. Okay. All
I
right.
mean, I'm even fine with that. With approval of city arborist, property owners may plant street trees.
So it doesn't need to say adjacent.
Huh?
It doesn't need to say adjacent, you're saying?
Yeah. Word it that way. As long as they got permission.
Because they can, then you're saying they can plant them 2 streets over, so long as,
As long as she agrees to them, because she may, Liz may find an appropriate location for a street tree. I mean, we know we get, we know we get homeowners that get upset when they're not identified for receiving a street tree, right? But this says with permission of the city arborist. I think that's pretty powerful for me.
Yeah, and there are examples of that happening. I remember those 3 or 4 houses on Sussex, they all planted those trees across the street on the side of the Prince Motel with an agreement that they would take care of them. So that's not adjacent, but
Yeah, it frees us up a little, more
Yeah.
flexibility.
So with approval of
Of the
city arborist, property owners may plant street trees,
Okay.
comma, provided that, and then the rest of it in entirety.
And that same paragraph, Liz, question for you. It talks about property owners enter into a written agreement. What would be the content of that written agreement?
For the first 2 years, I would say that would be primarily watering replacement if it died, or removal if it died. And then maybe mulching the base of it.
You have a standard template letter that you use, Liz, for?
I mean, that would be pretty easy to develop.
So it could be a form.
So we could create a form we could put on the website so people know what is expected of them.
Well, I don't think we would just put that out there. I think that would be when somebody inquired about planting a street tree. That would be, page 1 would be like the application, name, address, et cetera. And then the second part would be, here's what you have to do.
Okay. But, so there would be a standard process? Okay.
Seems to me it's more descriptive.
Um,
I have something on line 280,
okay.
and it's just organizational, 253-15, tree topping and hat racking of city trees prohibited.
I have the word prohibited.
You agree, Glenn? It's more descriptive
Right.
within the
Tree
title.
topping and hat racking of city trees, it leads you to believe, oh, when am I allowed to do that? But no, it's
So
prohibited.
you're
so-
saying the title of the section?
right,
Okay,
just add the word
prohibited.
prohibited.
Oh, I see. Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay. The thing I have on this page is down, and this is actually something that Carolyn brought up, as well as I've heard this from a few other people. At the end of 253-17B, so line 314, I guess, where oftentimes the ownership cannot be determined, whether the city planted the tree or the property owner planted, if it's been there 50 years. And so I think, Carolyn, you were saying that and I agree with this, that we should address that, and basically saying if the records are not available, then the city, if it's undetermined, that the city should be responsible.
Well, and I guess that's addressing that we do not have a definitive list of who planted city trees, so therefore we don't have a definitive list of who owns them.
Right.
Of course, they're all owned by the city, but the question is who planted them, correct?
So a phrase such as, if ownership is undetermined, the city shall take responsibility for ownership.
I think that's fine.
yeah,
Yeah,
agreed.
I would like to do that.
Say that again one more, you have that, Susan?
Yeah.
If ownership is undetermined, the city shall take responsibility for ownership. So it clears up that gray area.
If who determines it's undetermined. So what if the city says, it's obvious that so-and-so told me on the phone, this has happened to me before, that he planted these trees. Now, they sold the property. A year later, the new owner is like, these are city trees, they're on city property. I know who planted them.
Well, and if you were an owner, wouldn't it behoove you to say, divorce yourself from the trees, especially if they need to be paid for maintenance or something?
Well, you know how it is. Everybody wants them to be their, like I think of a lot of the places without sidewalks and curbs. They want it all to be their property, their trees, their landscaping until something's dead or has to be removed or repaired, and then it's the city's responsibility. And I look and I see that for the last couple of years, they've been hedge trimming this Leland cypress. The city obviously did not plant a Leland cypress on city property on Henlopen Avenue, and now it falls across their driveway. Whose responsibility is that? Technically, we can't determine really who planted that. We know it wasn't the city, but we don't really know who planted it. And it probably wasn't the person living there.
Read your wording again, Patrick.
It's just, if ownership is undetermined, the city shall take responsibility for ownership.
Then, can't that cover it, though? Carolyn?
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident, except in the definition, I think you say that the city owns all the street
Right.
trees. The question is who has responsibility for the maintenance of those trees, I
Yeah.
believe, right? So.
Yeah, lines
Take
276,
Takes
77.
I think it would be takes responsibility.
Period.
Period,
The
yeah.
city shall take responsibility for ownership?
Or responsibility for maintenance. That we say by definition that the city owns the street trees. Even if I planted the street tree, city owns it, but by virtue of me planting it, I'm taking responsibility for the maintenance. I think is where.
I mean, so going forward, are you going to have these written agreements for people who plant street trees, right? Some form of written agreement, and they're going to be required to do maintenance. And that's going to be a record of who planted the
That
tree
was
and what.
2 year, but we have, most of the trees planted in the city of Rehoboth were not planted by the city. They were just planted by well-meaning adjacent property, to use that good word again, adjacent property owners.
Right.
Like you can look and there's a house on the corner and it has 2 London plane trees on the front and 2 on the side, and those are the only 4 London plane trees in the area. The city did not plant them 30 years ago.
Right, but of what's out there now, how many can you, I mean, today, if you had to go out and figure out who planted a tree, most of them you're not going to be able to determine, right? You could say it was probably somebody who lived in this house 40 years ago, and
Yeah.
that house might have changed over, whatever. Right?
And
I'm
some we have records for, in terms of like property owners planting them, like upstairs in the building and licensing files, but mostly no, there's no
I
written
just think it'd
record.
be difficult to enforce this section as to trees that are currently planted, and I would almost want to say, you know, in the event there's a written agreement with the city for maintenance, that property owner who planted it is responsible for maintenance. Otherwise, I think the city's pretty much responsible for the maintenance of the street trees,
And
realistically.
Liz, I think you just said that if you've in the past and you would say that for 2 years they're responsible for the maintenance and the replacement if it dies within those 2 years, that inherently means to me that after 2 years, I have no responsibility anymore. It's a city tree.
That's what that reads to me too.
Okay. So I think the city is just responsible for the maintenance of all street trees unless there's a written agreement for that 2-year period.
I agree, and the way Glenn just reiterated it, I thought was perfect.
Well,
Do you remember what you said?
do you want to just?
It's on tape, Glenn.
Remember, this-
You can
this is-
listen
That's true.
to it.
That's true.
This is in the section
We've
of
got a record.
removal of dead or diseased trees, but I mean, do you want to just rewrite B? Because this still talks about
Well, but
notifying the owner.
I guess as a matter of policy, though, are the commissioners saying that for trees that are existing today that we don't have written agreements, pretty much the city's taking on the responsibility of maintenance for those trees, and going forward, because we're going to have written agreements,
We did talk about that, yeah. I thought we talked about that in an earlier meeting, that we were
We
gonna.
did.
Yeah, yeah.
we wanted- so
That
we
was
wanna
even in
cl-
the news article, I think. The city was going to start taking responsibility for it, yeah.
so we want to rewrite subsection B to make that clearer.
Yeah.
And then there'll be written agreements for the new
For the
street
news,
trees.
yeah.
But what about the after 2 years question? After 2 years, is the city taking it on, or do we want to, or is this saying, do we want to rewrite B so that even though the written agreement is going to say 2 years of maintenance, if it becomes diseased or dying, it remains the property owner's responsibility, or is it now the city's responsibility?
See, at the end of the day, it ends up, if it's on city property, regardless of what agreement they've signed, blah, 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 if there's a dead tree, it's gonna end up being the city's responsibility.
That's the way I see it. I just want to be sure it's a matter of policy. Everybody agrees and understands
I
that.
think, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I can always, what we would do now is write them and say, hey, your street tree died, you need to remove it. And if they want to fight it, at the end of the day, we have to take it out, right? We can't leave a dead street tree there.
That's the way I see it. Okay.
So you'll.
So I'll work on 25317B.
Okay. So on the next page, I actually have 3 things, and they're all interrelated. So solving at once, we'll get to all 3 of them. The first thing is, and I want to talk about all of them together because, as I said, they're interrelated. The first thing is we have old wording on lines 340 through 342 about the types of trees. We're saying that they have to be species native to the mid-Atlantic and defined by the Forest Service, or a non-native species approved by the city arborist. That language has since been changed to universally say that there will be a City of Rehoboth Beach approved tree list. Down on line 359, it does say each residence lot in a residence district other than a single-family lot, and each commercial or mixed-use lot not in a residence district shall have at least 2 trees per dwelling. Well, obviously, it's impractical for most commercial properties to plant trees, but that's there so that they contribute to that they would pay a fee in lieu and contribute to the trees in the city, and if they do have space, then they would plant. So then down on 366, where it specifies that trees will be from an approved list, the list is called residential tree list. So I'm wondering if we should remove the word residential, since there is a requirement for commercial. And then that way we would use that universally throughout the code wherever. So we would fix the lines 339 through 341 to say approved list. And we would use approved list throughout and just not use the word residential. What do we think?
I mean, to me, it makes logical sense that if you want to use a certain list of trees, you use them wherever.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I don't even know how the word residential got in there, but I just
Right.
think it's probably it shouldn't be there.
Right.
Okay. Are we all good with that? Oh, goody, 3 at once.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not.
Well, while we're on the tree list, is that appropriate to talk about it?
Sure.
I do not want to carry this forward to the public hearing and have a vote on it unless we have that resident or the tree list in front of us. So what is the status of that?
I mean, I can make one. I guess I think we talked about it recently.
We did, because I asked the question, when was it going to be ready? And a number of people looked at me like I had 2 heads,
I mean,
which may be true. I don't know.
I have worked on it. If I had thought about it in advance, I could have had it, to Ann and presented and stuff for today. But it's more of a rough draft without editing, we'll say. Like, I didn't put the botanical and the common name, and I didn't color code it and put heights and stuff like that. I just started working on species.
Well, I indicated at the beginning that I hope the sequence would be that after this, we kind of finalize it. We tasked Glenn with doing his legal review, and then we distributed this to all the tree vendors and arborists and the public. And I think it ought to have the tree list accompanying it.
Yes, I would agree.
So I don't know if we could put 2 or 3 week time goal on that, Liz?
That's no problem on my end.
Okay, sooner the better, but,
Okay, and then, I don't know whether we still have an issue on line 370. At the last meeting is where we said a line tree shall count as 1 tree for each property owner in calculating density. But Carolyn had a suggestion about, how much do you count it? Do you count the entire DBH, or do you go by the portion that's on each of the lots? So I guess, I don't know if that needs further clarification other than just counting as one tree, because mitigation also counts number of inches, so that's.
I'm for simplicity. I think that it's laudable to come up with that, but it's very complicated. And I would rather just say basically what it says now.
Okay. And if a tree is removed and the adjacent property owner loses their minimum density, then, Liz, you think that's a rare occurrence that would happen? Or that it's a rare occurrence that it would happen without the property owners basically getting together beforehand and agreeing how it's going to be handled?
We don't really have that many line trees that get removed. I see it as a potential issue, yes.
Yeah, you had said that at the last meeting. I knew that you were concerned about that.
So could this be line trees only used in mitigation process as opposed to tree density? Or is that kind of stealing something? You know, and if you were to measure the DBH of the actual on the DBH on the property in question to come up to the 90.
I don't know how you would measure a part of a DB. I mean, you have to measure the full DBH and then guesstimate a percentage, which would not be simple. Be fraught with error on that one.
I mean, I kind of agree with the mayor that it's simplicity, but I guess you could do one half, for mitigation purposes, each owner is entitled to 1/2 DBH, so 1/2 of the caliper would count for each.
So when I read this, it's saying it just counts for tree density. Does that mean it counts for mitigation for and against as well?
Well,
I think you have to consider both of them.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you can exclude it from one and
Right.
use it in another. I think it has to be both.
Right, but would that clarification about the mitigate come in, and not be here, but would be, because this is the minimum tree density section, but that would be in the mitigation section? We can talk about it when we get to the mitigation section, about how to add that.
Okay.
Maybe we should do that, because there is a line there about 90 inches, so maybe we would add it there.
Okay.
Okay, that's good.
Susan, on lines 372, 373, I expressed this last time. Forgive me, I don't remember the answer, but I was questioning why we can't require trees in the front setback in certain areas of the city. In the first block, the first blocks are pretty long,
Yeah, I remember you saying.
and I can understand within the first couple houses from the ocean perhaps, but I go up and down the streets and there's still a lot of street trees in the first block.
I'd be okay changing it to the first X amount of houses, or however you'd want to clarify that, because at the end of the first block, you are pretty far back.
And can you think of a rationale that the first 3 houses, the first quarter of the block, the first 100 feet,
Yeah, because if you do it by houses, what if they're different sized lots?
And you
Yeah,
do that.
I think most of them though, okay, say you say 3 houses, it's either gonna be 3 50-foot lots, or at the worst case, it'll be 3 100-foot lots, you know?
You do one, like numbers, right? 1 through 6. So that'd take the first 3, plus if a house had a boardwalk address, so maybe 4.
I favor that, because remember, this is, we're talking about
This
requirements.
would replace the words "on an ocean block."
Requirements here.
And we're doing it because of salt burn and.
I think that was why,
Yeah.
yeah, this is in the current code.
It is
We
harder.
used to have a list too of street trees
Salt.
that could be salt tolerant for the first block, didn't we?
Yeah, we have a list of salt tolerant trees. When, right now, you're afforded a little bit of leniency in the species you plant if you're in the ocean blocks. Honestly, most of the native trees are better at dealing with the salt than the non-natives anyways, but there are a few extras in there if you're doing planting on the ocean blocks.
I would favor something like that, because again, we're talking about requirements for trees, and right now, we came up with that requirement for a tree in the front setback on purpose, and we concurrently changed the code at that time, trying to prevent a situation where people were parking across the entire front of their property, and this, we restricted that, and we said, and by the way, you have to plant a tree in the front setback.
So what do you want to say? This should not apply to lots abutting the boardwalk or the first X feet of an ocean block?
I would use feet instead
Yeah, I
of
would.
trying to
I
use
would. Yeah, I
house
would
or
too. Yeah.
lot.
I would
Well,
just
maybe it
leave
has to be written as an
block.
exclusion, the houses within X feet of the end of the street are excluded or something. Glenn, you,
So it would be what, the first 150 feet? It's 3.
So I don't know. I'd have to think about how long a block is. So I'd have to go out and measure the blocks when they applied. Okay.
well, I'm looking at this, of course, you're looking at the commercial area, say Maryland Avenue, you've got Boardwalk Plaza on one side, Atlantic Sands on another side, so they're, say, 150 feet deep, but then you've got the residential property starting there. So you've got 150 feet for the commercial, and then, say, 50, 50, 50 for the residential. Go to the south side where it's all residential, and you've still got a long depth on the very first house because it's turned toward the boardwalk, and it still is in the neighborhood of, well, say 150 feet from the boardwalk, but it would, might only be 100 feet from the end of the street. So I would still say 100 feet plus 50, 50, 50. So that's 100, 250 there, 300, 300 in the northern commercial area scenario. So maybe pick one.
And are you measuring it on the street, or are you measuring it perpendicular to the ocean?
From the street end. Most of our streets are perpendicular, I think.
They are.
To
So
the
we'll have,
thing.
like,
Yeah, I mean, we got a
Pennsylvania
few
and Lake
like.
are diagonal.
I think we live like 300, and I wouldn't think about planting a tree that wasn't salt tolerant. Wouldn't even think of it.
But you've got a gorgeous tree on your corner that proves that a tree would live in the, you have a beautiful tree on your corner that proves that it's survivable in that first block
And they
area.
must be, they must be salt tolerant, that's all I can think of, because it does really well at that big cypress. And, but our cherry trees, the wisteria, none of them would survive if we get salt burn on the ones we got on the lakefront.
So are we amenable to picking something that 3/4 of the block has to fit this requirement, and that means a quarter is exempt, or do you want to let Liz come up with some kind of formula? I would say two-thirds of the block would.
And that doesn't prevent anybody from planting a salt-tolerant tree.
And you know that, I don't think it could be couched as percentage of a block. I think it has to be feet. Because your block, Commissioner Legree, is shorter than many other blocks, most other blocks, right? So Susan, are you comfortable working with Liz to
Yes,
come
yeah,
up with some
yeah,
kind of formula or probably a distance in feet that for me would not exceed a quarter or a third of the length of a normal block?
Right, okay.
And you're thinking if any part of the property is within that distance from the ocean, then
They're-
that lot doesn't.
They're exempt, right, right. I'm don't want to complicate it. Yeah, 10 feet of your property is on there, you have to have
Right.
0.5 trees added in the front.
But this takes away the requirement.
Right.
If you're within,
They want to put the requirement back in for those that are further away from the ocean but still on the ocean block.
This
As long
exempts,
as there are salt tolerant trees that can be planted.
what are you getting at? There are
I
salt,
think we should be planting them.
so what I'm hearing you get at is no exemptions, just all properties in the first block should be required to
And
have
my
trees
que-
in the
yeah,
front
my
yard
question-
setback.
Yeah, right, that's what I think. And my question was, is it so harsh, maybe on the first 150 feet or 200 feet, that nothing will survive?
I think that's been the general feeling.
I have a problem with making houses that like front the boardwalk, put a tree there. I think becomes a safety issue with the prevailing east-northeast winds, and we get strong winds. Like, part of the reason the storm was bad this morning is because the winds came from the west and the trees are used to the east. But if we know we have a problem with nor'easters, why force people into that position? You can still have the option to put the trees up there, and a lot of them do have some scrubby pines and stuff like that, but I think we're trying to be a little bit more flexible, so whether it's houses fronting the beach or the first 100 feet or whatever it may be. I mean, I think I just looked on Olive, and if it was the first 150 feet from the street end, it would be up to 5 Olive. That's not that far. That's only a couple of houses on each end.
Can I ask a stupid question, Liz? What makes the front setback different from the rear setback or the side setbacks? Is it because they don't have houses to block the wind?
You mean when they're on the boardwalk?
Yeah, or just close to the beach?
Yeah, no protection. So like even on some of the streets, like say on Delaware, where we have the expanded restroom, those trees planted on the front of Delaware are gonna be a lot more protected than if there was no restroom there, right? So the more exposure, the sole tree sticking out like a sore thumb always gets damaged more than like a forest relatively, because they protect each other, buffer each other.
Okay, so we'll figure out an amount of distance to put in there?
Yeah, and some, if there's a rationale, that would be nice. I'm not sure there can be, but.
Yeah. I do not have anything else until page 12, but if you want to, if we
Well,
were
let's go
continuing down,
one
then
at a time, not
I'm
page
open.
9,
Okay,
page 10. Line 456, 457. This is tree plans. Notes including mulching requirements, fertilization, planting details, and other information. I just put a question mark there. How deep are we getting into some of this stuff? Carolyn, just say Carolyn.
Yeah, Carolyn. My thought when I read that was it would be nice if there was a sample plan on the website that somebody could go to and say, okay, that's an example of what I have to do. Because again, as I read it, I'm thinking to myself, do I just need to say I'm going to mulch it once a year, or that kind of thing? So it'd be nice if there was a sample to be looked
yeah.
at.
What do we require now, Liz? Is this required now, or is this new? This stuff about the mulching requirements, fertilization, and planting details?
It's pretty similar to what
Okay.
we require now.
Yeah, Stan, can you advance it up to line 456? Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, but that's a good idea. I mean, I always think it's a good idea to have samples of anything where people may not be familiar with doing it, but you get this sort of information now, you're saying, Liz?
It depends. Some of the plan sets do have information, especially like they'll have a planting diagram or notes on fertilization and stuff like that. It's whether or not we really want to enforce that this has to be on every plan.
I think it's going too far.
What's it intended to accomplish?
I think it's intended to show like the maintenance for the trees. Like in other places I've worked, those would be requirements for like large scale projects. Maybe not like a small residential. Like where you get big plan sets and they would have like one of the pages would be forest plan page 1, forest plan page 2, and we don't really require that. So I think it's fine to leave it because it doesn't, it says shall include the following information, general notes, and other such information as needed.
Okay.
Sure, I'm just for
Anything on
keeping
that?
us, not burden our constituents so much.
That's pretty much how it is right now, though.
Can I go to lines 485 to 492? And Liz, maybe you can react to this. In here, starting on line 487, a tree removal permit shall not be granted where the applicant has failed to design and locate the proposed improvements. Shall only be granted after reasonable efforts have been made to save protected trees on a lot. Reasonable efforts shall include but not be limited to alteration of building design, alternate location of building, parking area and other impervious surfaces, water retention, or drainage infrastructure or relocation. Do we have, I'm questioning whether building and licensing has ever said you need to, there's an important tree here, you need to flop your plan, put your drive on the opposite side, and therefore you will save a magnificent tree. I don't know that we've ever done that. In fact, I can give you examples on Lake Drive where just the opposite happened, and we appeared to be powerless, I guess. And so I think this is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But can we really act on it? You know, because I think people read this and have a high expectation, including us. And then we find out that the house gets built and we could do nothing to force a design change to help save a tree or two. Do you have any experience
I'm
with?
not sure what you're talking about on Lake Avenue, so I don't know how long. Are you talking about over by Silver Lake?
No, Lake Drive.
Lake Drive?
Right.
Over by which one?
Big tree there that
So
was
that
taken
was-
down for a garage or something.
That was before my time.
Yeah.
So I can't really speak to that, but in
Right.
general, I call them requests. So I like to posit it in a nice way. Hey, we would like you to move your house back 3 feet. Please curve your walkway around the front tree. Can you relocate your outdoor shower? Can you move your pool over 6 feet? Those are the things I ask every single time, pretty much. It feels like a new house comes in.
Are you having success with that, or people resist it? They get their design in their mind, by golly, and I'm not changing it whatsoever. Because-
Both. I'm glad this is in there because it does give us power to ask for these changes. I think we usually end up in a compromise. I mean, I remember one time they had a 10 by 15 patio, and I said, can you rotate the patio? Didn't affect anything functionally. It's still a same square footage. It's just instead of 15 wide and 10 long, it was rotated. And they had a fit. You can't really predict how people are going to react with those type of things.
I'm glad to hear that you've had some favorable response to this. I'm still a skeptic overall that we can cause somebody to move an entire house over.
This has turned out to be a good, incentive because it gets to time, it gets to the time is money, because haven't you told me that some of the alternatives, in some cases where I guess a compromise couldn't be reached, the alternative is they have to go to Parks and Shade Tree and get permission for it, and that takes a lot of time and could completely screw up their building timeline, and therefore they agree, because they don't want to spend that time doing that. And I think there was a case at last month's Parks and Shade Tree like this, where he did choose to go to Parks and Shade Tree, right?
Yes, it's rare that they go to Park and
Right.
Shade,
Yeah.
honestly. Usually we meet
something out.
somewhere in the middle and we work it out. And if they have 3 mature trees, we end up keeping 1 or 2 or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great.
I had no idea, I had no desire to get rid of it. I just wanted us to be realistic in what can and can't be done. I'm excited to hear that there is some favorable response to this.
Yeah, the way we put it when people ask this is, we are not going to stop you from building your dream home. If the code allows you to have a house of this size, then you're allowed to have a house of that size. We do ask for concessions in terms of rerouting walkways, moving driveways to other sides, rotating pools, that type of stuff, like minor adjustments. We're not asking you to build a house in a U shape to preserve a tree in the center of the backyard, right? So that's where we get like the reasonable things that can be made as minor adjustments on the plan and aren't causing a $10,000 to $50,000 plan redo.
I think the concept that Commissioner Gay talked about is really critical. I think the one that the mayor and I are talking about was a garage that could have been moved just almost instantly.
Yeah.
And it didn't happen, and we need those things to happen.
Well, we have to keep in mind, we get it with sheds a lot too. Like, you can put your shed anywhere, right? It doesn't have to go on top of the 30-inch tree. But there are sometimes other things at play in terms of, like, if it's a garage, can it be located in the setback? Does it have to be so there sometimes would appear, and I don't know about this specific instance, maybe that's the only, maybe they built the house, here's what you get into, maybe they built the house, had the foundation done, had the walls framed, this could happen, and that we're dealing with one right now, okay? They've got the foundation plan done, the land, it's sold now, we have a new owner, they don't want a pool anymore. Now they want a garage. Well, now the driveway is going to have to go back the whole right side because they've already determined the driveway is on the right side. The house is already poured in. Well, now a tree has to come out, right?
Did they not know before they drew the plans about the position of the tree or
The lot sold. So the original person was going to do something else that didn't include a long driveway and a garage at the back. The original person was going to do a pool. So, and this isn't like, it's just an example of how things can change. So sometimes you do your best and, you know, the intent is to save this tree or whatever it may be. And unfortunately, that's not how it works out. But overall, I think we've had pretty good success with this, and I think in the current code, there's another section that kind of says something similar. I'm not saying it maybe couldn't be tightened up a little, but.
Well, what I like about the way Liz responded to this is, I believe she just said it gives us more power.
Right, yeah, yeah.
So anything that will facilitate that, I think that makes good logical sense.
Okay.
I just try to balance that with property owner rights as well, though.
Well, and that's why we say you can have your 10 by 15 patio, but maybe it needs to be moved over 3 feet. And that's where we get into the definition of what we call reasonable, right?
Well, and maybe the owner had not even thought that that could be an easy accommodation, if indeed it turned out that way.
I feel like we used to have more spec houses built in town, and that could just be my perception a few years ago. It's always easier to deal with that because then you only have one person.
Mm-hmm.
Then, like now, most of the time it's 4 clients, so then you have the builder in the center trying to deal with the client on one hand and the city on the other, and the client doesn't want to rotate their 10 by 15 patio because they just don't, and the builder just wants to get their permits and get going. So Spec houses with that are much easier, probably on the builder and the city, but right now, it's a lot of clients.
Is there ever an instance where, to accommodate saving a tree, either a house could easily be moved or to the back or the front a few feet, encroaching the setback, where we would encourage that to happen in providing a letter of support for them to go to the Board of Adjustment or something like that?
It's never happened yet where somebody wanted to go to the Board of Adjustments for that, in my mind, that I know of, at least.
Well, that concept is something I've thought about for a long time without any solution, but it has to do with flexibility. You know, how can we build in incentives and flexibility into the code to suggest that somebody does that, move it back? And I've never gotten too far into it because it is complicated. You know, you have to get the buy-in from all your neighbors that are surrounding you, and you can't just give them building and licensing. Can't say move it back. We'll allow you to encroach into the setback 5 feet if you save a tree. You know, there's
I've seen it codified a lot more detailed than that,
yeah.
for
In
sure,
other- in other
regarding,
places, right? You've seen it codified in other code.
yeah, in other codes regarding, specifically setbacks and parking, I've seen before.
Yeah.
And it's usually done based on feet or percentages. Like, you
Yeah.
can encroach 3 feet into the backyard if the chief building inspector, city manager, city arborist all agree that the tree is worth saving, right?
See, I would have trouble with that unless your neighbors had input,
And part
because
of the problem is except for the back, our setbacks are so minimal anyway.
Yeah.
That's really the problem. This is where our very generous code is the problem.
Commissioner Sharp.
I guess I keep thinking we've got a new opportunity coming for this very example, which is the stormwater runoff incentives. Because aren't those things tied together, that the more we enable trees to come down without some kind of reasonable accommodation, aren't we at odds with the goal of having more runoff going into the ground, going into the trees? So that's why I keep saying, and I know I sound like a broken record, I can't wait to see the incentives that are coming to us at some time in the future from the stormwater group, because maybe some of these things are interconnected. But it doesn't make any sense to me that if you have an opportunity to, let's say, move a house, a plan, a foot or something minimal, that flexibility couldn't be somehow worked in because of the advantage you get with stormwater runoff, which to me, these kind of things are just going to get more and more serious as the years go on. I mean, we're seeing it everywhere. So, to you, Mr. Legree.
Susan has the numbers, but the numbers are just overwhelming of the benefits of a significant size deciduous tree for just a bunch of reasons.
So I think what the mayor hits on is this flexibility issue, and how do we really, I don't want to say legislate it, but how do you work it into an ordinance so that you have the power to do that? And it benefits the whole community, which has got to be a consideration, I think, for us. So,
Well, and I'll be direct. I want to get this thing done, passed, and implemented soon. So I think that's good, that would be a future thing. You know, we get this and then we start.
yes,
start
and I just
tweaking.
want to continue to reinforce how I'm thinking about the incentives to come from stormwater, because it's going to make so much sense in my head.
Is, Commissioner Gay, is this currently in the code, this section?
I believe so, right, Liz? That's currently in the code?
Yes.
Okay, anything else on that page, Mayor?
Not for me.
Okay, so on the next page, on page 12, line 522, this is just a minor change that I picked up. It says, it refers to specimen tree, and we've since changed that to heritage tree, so I'll just change that word from specimen to heritage.
One other point on 518, we also use the word public right-of-way, so.
Oh, yeah, there's right away again, okay, right, okay. And then, wait a minute, I think that's all I have. Do you have anything else on this page?
One other question, on line 545, Liz, it says, a tree plan for the lot, if required, meeting the standards of, any case where a tree plan is not required?
Sorry, what do those standards go to, the 24 and 29?
24 is the tree plan.
For permits.
Plan,
And then
the-
29 is what?
29 is mitigation.
Okay, mitigation is any protected tree.
I guess the question though is, every time somebody applies for a tree removal permit, they're always required to provide a tree plan for the lot, right? Isn't that your question? So,
Yeah.
so there's no, it says a tree plan for the lot, if required, meeting the standards. And he's saying, isn't it always required when you're asking for a tree removal permit?
What are we saying is the tree plan, just the, like, little survey they have to do?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a requirement every single time.
So should we take out the words if required, because it's always required? That's
Yeah, that's my
Patrick's
question.
That was in there, I think.
Keeping it-
I think that was in the current code, which is picked up from that.
253.29.
You want to just take out if required, Liz, because it's always required?
Is it always required for 253, 24, and 29? Maybe that's what the
The
requirement.
29 is the mitigation of protected trees, so this is showing the mitigation of whatever tree you're taking out, so they'd be required to do the mitigation plan, and 24 is,
Building permits.
right,
Yeah, I don't see the if required where that does anything.
We'll take it out, and if you would just double check and let Susan know before the next version goes out.
Then the next thing I have is down at 596, and this is something Carolyn mentioned, and it's also something we did clarify elsewhere in the code.
Could I go to 575 real
Okay,
quick?
sure.
I just,
Yep.
Evan's not here, obviously, he's out there doing tree work and stuff, trying to restore the city, but the $25 administrative fee, I'm wondering for all our administrative fees, I can't imagine charging anything under, say, $50 or something nowadays. I mean, it takes a lot of effort and time for our personnel to process anything.
But the reason that's there, and I understand you all are going to be talking about all fees, and I think that's great, but the reason that's there is because the bulk of that expense comes not in that flat fee, but in the graduated fee based on the size of the trees they're removing. So they're not paying just 25, they're paying 25 plus a fee based on the total diameter of the trees.
So it's either 70, 75, 125, 325?
Yeah, right.
Can we just say that?
Plus the $20 app, the
Plus the $20 fee
$20.
that goes to for all applications, yeah. But that's why that's there.
Mayor, I guess I thought your point was a little bit different, that any standard application fee for administrative work would be at least $50.
That's a different category, yeah.
I think he's talking more about the $20 application fee.
Not mentioned in here, that's standard,
That's
flat,
what- yeah.
walking in the door.
Yes.
Would there ever be a time when someone had obtained a tree removal permit without having a tree?
Without removing a tree?
So,
No.
yeah, so you always are gonna pay the 50 or the 75.
It could be
Why
more.
don't we
as-
just,
it's-
why don't we just make it 75 or 125 or 325 or whatever
Because
we
it's
want, as
25 per tree.
Commissioner Bennett said.
Oh, but it's yeah,
So
it's
if-
25 per tree.
So if you're removing 10 trees, it's
Oh, I got you.
250 plus the 300, it's 550. And if you're removing,
Or whatever you want,
yeah, so if you're removing one 30-inch tree, it's $325.
What do we want to do here?
I mean, I don't care either way, but it seems like the 25 is just a nuisance.
Hi, it's Carolyn. You pay $20 when you drop off your permit.
Right, yeah.
This is what you're paying when you pick it up. And I think Liz's point is, if you're taking down 5 trees, for example, you're gonna pay 25 times 5 plus the additional for the size or the number of inches you're taking down. To me, this makes sense, and this only applies to live trees. If your tree's dead, you're just paying the $20. The $20, I think, is
Okay, yeah,
where the
that
real,
makes
I think
sense.
the real issue may be in the $20 that you're, that you're paying for any
Yeah,
permit
right,
you're dropping off.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I
But
thought,
that's
Mayor,
not not spelled out in the tree code. That's in
general.
another place.
Yes.
I thought that was, Mayor, that was your point.
Oh, that sounds good. That sounds reasonable. 'Cause
But it would still simplify it if we just rolled the 25 into there, don't you think? I know it says per tree, but it would be per tree, right? In other words, you would just,
Well, no, because the other's inches.
It's a
These others are based on size.
Yeah,
Right.
the inches are cumulative. So whether it's one tree that equals 50 inches or 10 5-inch trees, it's still the 300.
you run that by me
It's the
again?
cumulative inches of all the trees. So it's not based on the number of trees.
If you have 10 trees that are 15 inches each,
Right.
so that would be 10 times 25, or $250 for the administrative fee. And then you would have $50 for each tree of 15 inches. Then that's 10, so that would be 500. So it'd be $750 for 10 trees at 15 inches, right?
No, that's not how I read
Right, so
it.
that's $75 a tree.
Well, I'm glad we're bringing this up because that's not how I read it at all.
The way I read this, these inches are cumulative. So if you have,
Yeah.
let's say you have
Oh,
5
I'm sorry.
trees and each tree is
Would be-
4 inches. You're gonna pay the 5 times 125 or the 125
150.
plus your 100.
150.
It's the fees in A, B, and C aren't per tree. It's
That's
based on the
total.
cumulative
Yeah,
inches
right.
you're taking down.
A, B, and C are per tree?
No,
they're
no.
cumulative.
It says-
25 is per tree.
Right.
Right.
The A, B, and
Right.
C are the cumulative inches of the trees you're taking down. So let's say each tree is 4 inches, and you have 5 trees, you got a total of 20 cumulative inches, you got 100 plus the
Right.
5 times 25, the 125.
So that's
So the
225.
225,
Okay.
because you're doing 5 trees.
Yeah.
That's,
the
yeah, I don't read it, I
cumulate to
didn't read it
20.
like that. I understand what you're saying, but I didn't read it like that.
And no, to me, this is written clearly.
The only
But,
other way I think we could do it is just a per inch price.
Is it what?
Per inch price.
Yeah.
And then everybody will want to be there to watch me measure the trees.
Right,
And then
yeah.
when they'll disagree, I've already had this, I'll have to go
Yeah,
back out and
right,
measure them in
right.
front of them. That's how DC does it though, is by inch circumference, but inch.
Would it just be a little easier to understand if you, the layout of it is tree removal permit fee, and then, if you will, new line, a non-refundable administrative fee will be collected by the city of $25 per tree. Then, new line, plus a fee for the total diameter of trees removed.
Plus maybe the total cumulative.
Yeah, I would
diameter?
add cumulative
Cumulative.
there.
Yeah, cumulative diameter. But now-
So if
now I
they
just-
equaled,
I
if they
just-
equaled over 24, you're gonna pay 300 plus the 25 per tree.
Although I
5
just
trees.
noticed something else I hadn't seen before. Non-refundable? When would the administrative fee for a tree removal permit ever be refundable?
When they change their mind and they want their money back.
Okay, so there is, okay.
Yep.
All right. So they
Or,
do get
or if
that,
it's
okay.
denied, right?
Well, these fees we collect at the issuance of the permit. So a denied
I say a denied permit still pays $20.
A denied permit paid $20.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
I wish I'd never said anything.
It's better to figure it out
I'm
now
glad
than
you
after
did,
the
because
fact.
I found it confusing.
Yeah, okay, so we'll add cumulative. The next one I have is this, and Carolyn brought this up, that we need to clarify this. On line 596, it talks about any land disturbance activity. And previously on line 386, in another meeting, we had addressed that needing to define what land disturbance activity is, and it had been defined elsewhere in the code with the stormwater protection provision that was adopted a couple of years ago as at least 1,000 square feet. So we moved that, we just mirrored that qualification of land disturbance activity on 386. And so my feeling would be we should just add that on 596 as well, to say any land disturbance activity of 1,000 square feet or more. Yeah. So that it matches the other. Okay. And then on 599, the red there, on 599 and 600 are edit changes that came from Wallace Montgomery. Just wordsmithing.
Does this, and if I'm in the weeds, just tell me, but does this pertain also to adjacent property? In other words, if you have a tree that's been affected by construction that someone else has done?
It's just left. It's left at the.
That's what we talked about this morning.
Yeah, no,
right?
we did, yeah.
It seems like that question has been asked before.
Yeah.
That's why I said I don't know if I'm in the weeds with it.
No,
because
I don't
know if
think
we've-
you are.
I don't know if we figured it out.
But I thought the answer to it was, and somebody checked me if I made this up, the answer to it was that becomes a legal issue between the properties. That seems to ring a bell, Glenn.
Yeah, I think, right, to the extent it damages the neighbor's property, then yeah, that's a civil matter that they
Yeah.
have to work out. I was
That-
thinking more,
that- yeah,
I was
it
thinking more in the context of, could we as a city require
Require
that
protection.
you protect the neighbor's property somehow? But I think that's getting into the weeds, so.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think we've talked about it, because when you termed it civil,
Yeah.
that becomes a civil
Okay,
issue.
thank you.
I don't have anything else till line 683. Do you have anything on the next page, Mayor, page 14?
683, no.
Okay, so then, actually, I left it in red type, because at the last meeting, we agreed that we would do the tree for tree mitigation, line 680 and 81. Each protected tree shall be replaced with one tree, but initially we had of the same species or from the approved list, and we decided we didn't want to say of the same species in case it's something we didn't want to replace, so the rule is just flat, replaced with one tree selected from the approved list, and we'll take out the word residential, just have it be the City of Rehoboth Beach approved list. But now, here's where we get, the next line is what we also agreed to at the last meeting, that no mitigation shall be required if there are 90 inches DBH or more trees remaining on the lot. And this is perhaps where we would add mitigation for line trees would be counted as, what, half to each property owner? I think that's what you said.
That's something I suggested, but
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And simple and easy.
Right.
That's what this is all about.
So how would you word that? Would you say mitigation for line trees, or just line trees shall count?
Are credited at 50%.
Well, okay, line trees shall be, okay. Okay,
I thought we were crediting them 100%. We're not?
well, tree for tree they count as one, but if you're counting up the total inches for mitigation, they're only counting half.
So let me take it just one step further and tell me if I've got this correct. if I've got a lime tree and 3/4 of that tree is on my property, clearly, and only a quarter is on the neighbor's going to benefit more, I'm gonna benefit less.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wondered if I got that right. Is that what we want?
I just think it was subjective to try to start arguing, oh, no, it's only 60% of my property, or it's 30%, right? I mean,
Well, I've got one, Tim, and it is very, very clear.
Oh, I have
There
one,
is no
yeah.
argument. So I'm just referring to, it's clearly by sight. And I'm just wondering,
so if it's more than 50%, is it your tree then?
well, no, I'm just wondering that if by advantaging one neighbor, would there be a perception that we're disadvantaging another neighbor?
I just want to throw out there that under today's code, you don't get credit at all.
I know.
So it is an improvement. I agree with you that, to me, it would be simple to look and say 60% is on yours, 40% is on theirs. So when you do the DBH, you get 60% of it. But I get how that could be complicated for Liz going out and saying, I'm only giving you 50%.
Right.
So, but it is an improvement over today. So I think.
I'm not arguing it. I just wanted to make sure I understood it correctly. Because if Liz were to say, oh, if you did it by percentage, that really throws her for a loop, that would have been a piece of interesting information. But I'm not questioning how this is,
I mean, you have me thinking about it, because if you could plant a tree entirely on your property, but 10 years later, that trunk has
it
grown, and now it
becomes.
goes over the line, and now you only get credit for half of it.
I have exactly that issue.
Right, okay,
Right.
Yeah, shouldn't have planted it so close to the line.
right.
What are the disadvantages of saying 100% for each party, as I think the mayor was thinking about?
Well, we are doing that for counting it as a tree.
Yeah, we are
Yes,
doing that for
indeed
the
we are,
tree
but
tree,
for mitigation,
Why not?
I'm fine with each property would count it as 100%?
Well, then I thought we said, well, then we would have less
I'm with
trees.
that, and then we could think of all the problems we'd
Yeah.
solve. The conflict is gone, you know? Maybe I'm missing things.
I thought last time when we talked
take
about
it
that.
out.
Yeah, I thought last time when we talked about that, if we did that, somebody who might have almost a clear lot is getting credit and doesn't have to plant anything.
It's because he touches the line.
And he's getting credit for those trees. I think that was our last discussion about that, where
I
we got
think
hung
that's
up on it.
right.
I think I'm leaning toward being very simple and just, you count it as 100%, and for mitigation, it's 100%.
I agree.
So a 30-inch tree counts as 30 inches of mitigation for one property and 30 for the other?
Yep.
However, if our goal is, take me to the goal. If the goal is preservation of trees, in essence, that really seems to fly in conflict with that, does it?
Yes.
Okay.
We want more trees.
Right. So you're double counting, so it's like, yeah, you double count.
I mean, it sounds simple, but, I mean, it is simple, but it goes against the goal.
And to be honest with you, the best place to plant a live or a large tree or whatever is towards the edge, because you've got houses in the middle, your pool, your garage, or, that's about the only place you can truly plant a tree that's going to grow to 30, 40, 50 dBH.
So our goal is to prevent the removal.
Well,
In that sense. That's why we have mitigation, or we have mitigation because we,
well, no, the mitigation replaces the canopy. I mean, they're not trying.
Give your name at least each time you
Yes,
talk.
Carolyn Diefendorfer. This is one, if somebody only has trees on the line and they need to take one of them down, this is where it gets really muddy. But I don't think you're gonna have people taking trees down just because they can. it's not cheap to take a tree down. And if you are trying to improve or increase the canopy, giving them credit for half is much better than where they are under today's code. And making it 1-for-1 is much better than today's code. So I don't think you're going to get anybody arguing, saying, especially if there needs to be education on this change. And use an example where under today's code, this property, Miss A, might have to plant 4 trees, but under the new code, you might have to plant 1 or you might get away with none if the trees remaining are large. So I think it is a huge improvement. And I would struggle with, if I had a tree on the line, saying that both houses get the full DBH to me is hard to swallow, because there's not 60 inches of tree. There's 30 inches of tree, and allowing it to count twice, but allowing it to count for the minimum, I think is okay. I don't know. This is a hard one, but I think this is a huge improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Why are people taking down, I know the answer. Why are people taking down lime trees? They set away from they're out in a great place.
I have an example for you, Carolyn Diefendorfer. We had a lime tree that was damaging our garage, and it was lifting up the driveway so that you could not open the door on that side. We needed the lime tree to come down to be able to access that side of the garage. So, like I said, I think people are going to have good reasons for taking down trees. I don't think you're all of a sudden going to get people coming in and saying, well, now that it's 1-for-1, I want to take this down, because it's not cheap to take down. If a tree is large, it's not inexpensive to take a tree down. So.
Well, and you certainly find builders, new construction, that if they can get permission from the neighbor to take down a lime tree, they would probably do that over the builder that doesn't get permission from a neighbor, and they just clear cut that tree, so you have half a tree, essentially half a tree standing. Yeah.
And
So go back to your initial proposal, Susan, was lime trees credited at 50%.
That's what was talked about up here, 50% DVH per property.
I'm fine.
Yeah, and
We're all
just
fine.
curious, carrying this forward though, the question of lime tree is ownership, right? Is that who owns it or who gets credit for it? But as we go forward, and probably looking back 5-8 years, we have tree plantings for properties, new properties, existing properties, that define who owns that tree, correct? Or is it defined as a lime tree? So that 5, 10, 20 years from now, you could go back to those records and say, no, I'm the one that purchased that plan, it was on my original, so that tree should be mine. Could that come into it also? I mean, I don't want to complicate it further, but we can prove ownership on some of this stuff with the tree plans that have been submitted with new houses or renovations or this type of stuff.
With the if
Surveys.
it's new houses and we have an accurate survey.
Right.
Yes.
But I mean, looking forward, I mean, that's a way to also solve this issue. For like Tony, if she had a tree plan that said, I planted this and it grew over the line, but kind of I have the receipts or the original tree plan that it's mine.
Legally, code aside, legally, it's a lime tree. It doesn't matter who planted it, where they intended it to grow.
Right, but you're just talking about for who gets credit for mitigation. One way you
Okay.
could do it is, right, you're saying if there's proof that this owner planted it, they should get all of the mitigation credit perhaps. So, I mean, that's,
But
I think
leave it
you're
as
really,
is right now, but I'm
this,
just thinking
it's
years
just
down the
really
road.
bogging us down. I mean, think of the time that would go into researching, pulling people's records from the 3rd floor, going through thick files.
to leave it, each owner gets credit half.
I think that's easy. I think that's easiest, yeah.
And just as an example, we had a deadline tree that I had to take out, And we didn't sit there and measure and argue about when it was planted and who, or what percentage was on, we were just like, oh, we'll split it 50-50, right? And
But it didn't count for anything. So
Right, right.
imagine now,
Right.
we don't have really a lot of problems with lime trees. Like, pretty much people are amicable about them. They come out if they have to come out.
And if someone wants to argue that they planted it and they should get 100% credit, they've got the ability to do that with the, if they want to appeal Liz's decision.
That's true.
But going forward, this is a good solution right now. Okay.
Okay. I'll just note at the top of page 16, there is a line there, it talks about the tree preservation account and what those monies can be used for, and it mentions incentives. And we've talked about incentives, we don't have any specific ones right now. Do we want to leave that in?
What line is that?
707, 708.
Yeah.
I saw that in there, and I think it's undefined, and I'm not sure it's prudent to keep it in there. at
So we
this
just
time.
take out the line altogether? Because in this case, it probably means a financial incentive because it's in the paragraph about the tree preservation fund. And I'm not sure that we're prepared to do that, to give people a grant for planting trees. So,
Not.
I'm almost sure we'll,
Why not? We should be doing that. I mean, I mentioned it 6 years ago when I started here. How do we not have that? In a city that values its trees, how are we not providing incentives for
Yeah.
maintenance and planting? Why?
okay.
I'm almost sure we're gonna talk about credits for tree planting in
Well-
stormwater management.
I mean, Glenn can probably even remember years ago when I asked him how the fund could be used now, because it only says public.
Right, yeah.
And to me, it was really counterintuitive that we're taking money for trees that couldn't be planted on private property, right? That's where this money comes from. We can't plant our 10 trees on this private property, so we're gonna pay a fee in lieu for these 5. And then we're spending it on city property because we don't have, private property has better land than the city outside of the parks. Like street trees, they're in a limited area. It's better for the tree to go on somebody's private property. So,
But I'm listening to Commissioner Legree. Am I understanding you that you're on the same wavelength as I am, that these incentives are coming from the Stormwater Task Force? We just don't have them yet? Okay.
So are you amenable to taking this out?
I would leave it in.
Just leave it in.
Leave it in because we might have some in the future. Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Well, it is with me, because then if anyone questions, well, what are these incentives? They're coming as part of the Stormwater Task Force, finishing up their work and making recommendations. I'm fine with it the way it is. Makes perfect sense to me.
Okay.
Next.
Actually, we're up to the last article, and I just want to say in preface from that this comes from Glenn and has a couple of months ago, but I did notice a couple of things that mostly were stuff that came about after this was written, but before today. So just a couple of correction on lines 715 and 719. The code reference should be 253.25 and not 27. So that was just a numbering change that came about. And then on line 727, it's my recollection that the only fee that we agreed to change from the last meeting was the appeal fee to go to Parks and Shade Tree, and making that $450 instead of $250, based on Liz's analysis of the actual cost being something like $600 or $700. So if I'm wrong, tell me otherwise. I guess it would go in there as $450.
No, I think that's more of an accurate reflection of Glenn's fee plus other fees.
Okay. And then line 745 was an editorial change that came from Wallace Montgomery. It had said before that the city arborist may file a written response, but actually she always does. So it should be shall file a written response. If there's an appeal, obviously the city is going to have to respond. So that change came from them. And then, let's see. 8, okay. If you have anything else, just stop me, otherwise I'm just going to go through these quickly because there's just a few. On line 832, under the violations, it talks about mitigations. Yeah, violations of this chapter involving trees of 6 inches caliper or greater. We got to talk about that too, because I think the current one is 8.
You said line 832?
Yeah, that's 830, but 832, anyway, it says the replacement tree shall be a native species, and I'm wondering again, we change that to the standard from the city-approved tree list, right? Yeah, okay.
Shall be a native species.
No, just
Selected.
shall be on the city of Rehoboth.
Chosen from the appropriate,
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
approved tree list.
Right. Yeah, but do we want to say, this is about violations involving trees of 6 inches caliper or greater? And do we want to say, do we want to be 6 or do we want to make 8? I think 8 is the definition for protected tree now. Doesn't matter to me, I just happen to
And for
notice it.
consistency, it's probably 8, right?
I think it's 8, yeah. But also, I guess my only question is, a lot of this mitigation stuff is already covered under mitigation. So you get to line 840, and it's got, the property owner shall be responsible for the maintenance of mitigation trees, shall submit to an on-site inspection 12 months. I think we may have 6 months elsewhere in the code. Now, we used to be 12 months, but we changed it. And it shall be replaced within 60 days, but elsewhere in the code, it also talks about how you have to have a signed agreement or of sale, or you have to have a signed proposal. So I guess my question is, if we need to repeat it, then we need to just lift it and repeat the whole thing, right? But it must be repeated here for a reason, because that's why we're not going to just take it out, right? That these are
Right, I
for
mean, this-
violations.
Right, this is when you're in violation world. The other section is when you're appearing on in an appeal before the Parks and Shade Tree Commission, and you're asking for mitigation. So here, I think we need to say it again, because now it'll just be something that the city's doing through its enforcement mechanism.
Okay.
Not through the Parks and Shade Tree Commission.
But then we would pick up the same language
Yes.
that's in the other one?
Actually,
Okay, that's
yeah.
fine, yeah. That is all I have. Anybody else?
Wow.
This is not something that I want to spend too much time on at all, because it's not going to go in here, but I would like to broach a subject with you that has bothered me for a little while. And Glenn, you're going to have to help me with this. This is a situation where an owner gets a building permit to construct a house, promises essentially to protect trees in the vicinity of the house, starts construction, and at some point before the construction is even finished, they then start applying to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission to take down those trees they just said they would protect. There's just something unpalatable about that process for me. Glenn, did I describe it?
Yeah, so what happens is, as I understand it, when there's applications made for a building permit to construct a new home, as part of that process, the new owner needs to submit a tree protection plan and then a tree planting plan. The tree planting plan gets approved by the city arborist, and that's the plan that they're supposed to build, just like the house that they're supposed to build. And as you said, at some point, and this has happened several times, at some point during the construction process, the new owner files an application with the Parks and Shade Tree Commission to revise, change, not plant those trees, mitigate in some other way, pay a fee in lieu of mitigation, but there is a request to make a change to that plan. And I agree with you that there is something that feels wrong about that, because they've agreed to build this particular house under the building permit, they've agreed to install these particular trees under the same process, but for some reason you can change, you can go to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission and ask for a change to that.
Within 30 days.
Say that again?
Within 30 days of the date of the decision.
Right.
So if you have an approved planting plan on, say, November 1st, you have 30 days in which you can change your mind in terms of asking Park and Shade for a fee in lieu of mitigation. We've always allowed the species to change as long as they still met code. So say you gave me a planting plan for 3 red oaks and now you want 3 river birches, that's okay. But you can't 3 months later change your mind that you want to pay a fee in lieu.
I mean, one fix that seems easy but probably isn't is just to say that the appeals process is not available in the context of a new tree planting plan. The problem is during the construction process, sometimes there's changes made to the home. You know, you get halfway into it and you're like, oh, nope, this doesn't work this way. We need to turn the garage, whatever. And once that happens, then the tree plan may be affected. The garage door was over here. Now I'm changing the garage this way. Can't plant that tree there because it's right in front of where my new entrance to the garage will be. So I can see instances where it would make sense to be able to appeal to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission even after you've agreed to a tree planting plan. But in general, like it does seem to me that where there's no changes to the plan, you shouldn't be able to midstream come in and ask for a revision to the tree planting plan that you've agreed to. Or I mean, the case that it typically seems unseemly is when the planting plan is agreed to. They're in the middle of construction. They come and ask, can I just pay a fee in lieu of mitigation? So I just pay money and I don't have to plant trees. That's typically, because you can plant the trees. The trees are approved. There's locations on the lot where they can go, but they just don't want to tree their lot. And that's the instance where I think we get bothered by it.
Well, the submittal of a tree planting plan and tree protection plan seems insincere when in the middle of construction, they then say, here's what I really want. In which case, again, it's just, there seems to be something wrong with that process.
Well, I know why they do it that way, so maybe that'll help if you can think of a solution. They do it that way because they have to have all that approved to get their building permit. And they know that, like, in terms of changing species and stuff, a lot of the developers will just put the same old recipe down, 2 river birches and a redbud. Then, as the house is getting built, the owners hire a landscaper or a landscape designer, and they come up with a plan, and they say, well, they don't want to do 2 river birches. They want to do this, this, and that. And then I have to reevaluate everything and reapprove it. That's on the better end. The end you're talking about is where they put it on paper to get an approved plan with the intent to appeal.
So I'm lost in this. Why is there an option to appeal?
Within 30 days, in the code, you're allowed to appeal anything with any decision of the city arborist within 30 days.
But
related to a tree permit.
If we know that's how it's being used, why can't we just change that?
Probably should.
I mean, straightforwardly.
In other words, appeals, you can appeal except under these conditions or something.
Well, you could do it what you could do, I guess, as I'm thinking this through, is rather than having an automatic right of appeal, you could allow for an appeal if there are typically, like, the circumstances in a Board of Adjustment where you're able to, you get it, anyways, I'm making it too complicated. You could say if there's the mistake of fact, new information, there's 3 triggers that usually work for reconsideration in a Board of Adjustment deal. So you could say if there's mistake of fact, so they'd have to come into the Parks and Shade Tree Commission and say, I know you don't normally allow appeals for this sort of an instance, but here's why it makes sense this time. I didn't know this fact when I submitted my first plan. There's a change of circumstances. I had to turn my garage, so it makes sense in this instance. But it wouldn't be an automatic right of appeal. So the Parks and Shade Tree Commission would have to make an initial decision as to whether they'd hear it because of some changed circumstance or new information, or whether this is just somebody who can plant the plan that they submitted, but they want to change, they want to do something different.
So, City Solicitor, even in your example of turning a garage, why wouldn't they have to go back to square one on their tree plan? You're working you're working with something that you have decided because of a change in the plan is no longer valid.
Right, and that's what you do, Liz, right? In my example, which is probably a poor one.
Well, let's say placement of a shed. They weren't going to have one. Now they're going to have a shed. And they were going to plant 2 trees where the shed, they were going to line their whole backyard in trees. And now where the shed is, they can't have 2 trees.
In that instance, would you let them submit a new tree planting plan? I mean, you let them submit a new planning plan and see if you could approve it.
Yeah.
We're talking about, they want to put the shed there, it's where they had 2 trees. They don't want to plant those 2 trees. They don't want to submit a new plan. They just want to now come to the Parks and Shade Tree Commission.
No,
Yeah.
That's a no.
no. That's a-
30-day, if the trees on the lot, if the work for the issued permit is done, the trees are gone, then they can revise, they can plant those 2 trees somewhere else, but they can't then go for a fee in lieu of mitigation if the 30 days has passed.
So here's, yes, go ahead. Your name?
Carolyn Diefendorfer. I'm wondering if, with the change in the code to a one-for-one replacement, if you're gonna have less instances of this. Under the old code, you might have to plant 5, 6, 7 trees. Under the new one, if you've got left enough DBH, in theory, you're gonna be planting less trees. You're gonna be planting one for one. So yeah, if you had to take, you know, a whole bunch of trees down, you might have a lot to plant, but I have a feeling you're gonna have less to plant under the new code when you build a house than you would under the existing code.
Okay, here's an
It might be
example.
where you get fewer appeals.
Here's an example. Brand new house is being designed. The entire front is a porch area there. There is a tree this big directly in the center of that house and only 3 feet out from the steps of the porch. So they designed the house with the front door absolutely centered. And it's, rather than offsetting it 3 feet to the right, 3 feet to the left, and having an off-centered design, they design it so that it's centered, and my opinion is with the intention of taking down that tree that they said they would protect. And that's why I call it an insincere tree protection plan or something. Because I don't think there was ever an intention to save that tree.
I can give you a perfect example because it's happened recently. I said, I have a problem with this tree coming out for your front walkway. You could just move your front walkway 1 foot to the right or curve it or make it in an L, or it doesn't have to go from A to B. You have the coverage, right? You have the percentage left that you can add a couple square feet if you need to curve. Okay, that's no problem. Not a problem. Have it in writing, in email. Not a problem to retain that tree. Now, issue all the building permits, issue the tree permits. They're building the house. The house is basically built now. I get a new tree permit application to remove that tree from the same person who said they would retain the tree. So I email him. I forward the email where he said he would retain it 8 months ago. And I say, just saw the new tree permit application. What happened to below? That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard back. I haven't denied it, haven't approved it, haven't have it withdrawn. It's just sitting there. Because what do you say to that?
Well, interestingly, if that's a recent case,
Yep.
mine example was a real case too, about a year ago.
No, this is more recent. This is
So
the
what I'm
house
saying
isn't out.
is it's happening with greater frequency than we think.
But Mayor, so Liz, you can say no and not approve the tree removal permit, correct?
I can. I'm waiting on them to answer my question. Maybe something did change that I don't know. I don't see it.
They didn't give you a reason at all on the application.
No, everything looks the same to me.
So even if they do and their tree plan is insincere and they go before the, to get a fee in lieu of mitigation, the Parks and Shade Tree Committee can always just say no, right? Isn't
Yes.
that what we would expect them to do? I guess I'm having trouble finding. I understand that the insincerity is frustrating and annoying, but it's not an automatic yes once they go to get the fee in lieu of mitigation. And in fact,
Well,
they have to pay fees and everything else and may still get.
in the current
answer
code, they
no.
can only request a fee in lieu of mitigation with the city arborist's approval. So if I don't, in the current code, if that's not the case, then they can't get a fee in lieu.
Like I said, I'm not intending to take this any farther for this version. We want to get this done, passed, and implemented. But I just wanted to share that frustration because it's been ongoing for quite some time, and there are multiple examples of this same thing.
Mayor, just a clarification, and Liz too, when we have plans and tree plans, house plans, tree plans, et cetera, that are used in supposed good faith to get building permits and tree permits, plans, are those not deemed as these are the agreements for a certain period of time?
I think they are. So this is not a new issue. Tim Spees probably 6 years ago, Liz, maybe more, raised this,
10,
maybe
10,
10?
10 plus.
10
More than
plus?
4,
I
maybe.
mean, it's been a long time.
15, yeah.
Could it be that long ago? Wow. And we did some research on it, and I remember, I mean, I still have the research file, I have to look at it, but my recollection is there is an argument that it's either an unclean hands argument, you can't come asking for relief from the Park and Shade Tree Commission when everybody's acted in good faith, and now you're kind of just switching horses. It was either a good faith argument or it was a kind of a reverse estoppel. Usually estoppel is against the city, but you're stopped from pursuing relief from the Park and Shade Tree Commission because of the representations you've made previously. So I think there's some legal merit to saying you can't do what you're trying to do here. I mean, if you want to take this up at some point and pursue it, we can, again, not slowing down this process, but we can bring a draft ordinance that would try to button this down a little bit. And I hear your kind of view is that anybody, should have an option to at least appear before the Park and Shade Tree Commission, and they should do the right thing and say no if somebody's, but it doesn't always happen that way.
I can think of one case in which it didn't happen that way.
But am I right that what's in the middle of both of these good points is the middle ground is you are stuck, really, with your documents you presented in good faith to the city. We approved them in good faith. So that's what you're dealing with for X number of whatever, 24 months, 36 months, what.
Yeah,
I mean, wouldn't that send a message that you need to be committed when you put forward a tree plan, unless there's some extraordinary circumstance, I don't know what that would be, because you're not going to get any relief. It seems like to me you could stop it at the submission, and you could also prevent them from going to being for a certain period of time. You're not, the appeal process is not available until after X.
I think we considered at one point putting some sort of statement on the tree permit that they would have to sign that says, I understand that this is my plan and I don't have relief from the Park and Shade Tree Commission for relief from this plan.
And where would this go in the code? Would it go in the appeals section as a limitation on appeals, or would it go somewhere else?
Probably as a limitation on appeals, but but making it very clear up front, I think, is the discussion we were having before, and I suppose it kind of fizzled, but that was where we came down on it. I mean, this is something that should be corrected on the front end versus.
Yes, and Mayor, now you just jogged my memory that wasn't it just a handful of months ago, you were quite incensed about some real situation where there was deliberate takedown of trees during construction, and I hear you, Commissioner Gay, we changed that?
We changed something in the code as a result of that.
Right, but I think what that's setting up, you were red-faced, you were so upset about it, and I guess what that's telling me is the trend of things being done deliberately is going in the opposite direction from, I think, the good faith route.
Clinton, help me remember, but do we have in the partitioning code, if you are,
Microphone.
I'm sorry, if you're denied a partitioning, don't you have to wait a year for reapplication, or is it petitioning, or there's something that if you're denied application, it has to be up to a year that
Board
you
of Adjustment
reapply?
appeal and
I think it's
various.
I think it might be a variance request, but it might be also something in the subdivision code as well. But those provisions do exist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think in the last year, the 3 instances I've seen puts Park and Tree in a very difficult position, because the people who've come forward, even though they had the approved tree plans, well, they decided to move the doorway somewhere, they decided to move the driveway. And what do you do at that point? And I think that's where you're going to, Mayor, is they knew all along, I think, they knew all along probably what they were doing, get this tree plan, and then, oh, never mind. And I don't know how we enforce that,
And
unless we're a little more strict with it.
I find it interesting concept to say there's a period of time before you can appeal.
Right.
Because then it could be perhaps looked on as, well, gosh, you've lived with that condition for a year. Why the need for a change? Why is it so important? So that may be one way to address it.
And we've also added the language in here about, from Board of Adjustments, of unnecessary hardship or exceptional practical difficulties, which is kind of vague in a sense in some regards. I mean, it's accepted language, but doesn't that give the reapplication of will a little more leeway to, I don't know.
I mean, it's just tough to figure out, what language you would use. At least exceptional practical difficulty and hardship have, again, in the context of a Board of Adjustment, there's a lot talked about what those terms mean. There's a lot of judicial opinions that allow for you to define those terms. So I don't know if we could come up with something that would be clearer here. I mean, I guess I kind of go back to our initial thoughts, which is that it should either be cleaned up on the front end so that the appeal route isn't available, or, and I think Commissioner Sharp said, in some extreme circumstance, maybe it is available. And that's when I was talking about you'd have to show a mistake of fact or new facts that weren't available when you submitted the plan before the board would hear or before the Park and Shade Tree Commission would hear your appeal. But I do think that, if we want to address this is something that's probably a little bit longer discussion that we should, take as a separate agenda.
What I would like to do, if there's no objection, is task Glenn with looking further, investigating this. However, not until after this tree code revision is actually consummated and done. Susan, anything else?
That was all I had.
Carolyn, anything further? We've hit all your points. Anybody else up here?
Susan or Mayor, I've got a quick question. We got a lot of information from Wallace Montgomery. I don't know that we ever discussed all of it. Is that?
We discussed the parts that pertain their line edits to the tree ordinance. I think the rest of it was about whether or not it should go in the zoning code or not, and we talked about that at the last meeting.
Well, there's a lot of that, but recall that there was a whole list that he gave of suggested edits, and we had a pre-meeting where we went through a bunch of those, and we're like, yep, that makes sense. And so a lot of that got incorporated. We didn't want to bog the whole commission down with all those. So the things that weren't clearly like this is a change that needs to happen, we brought all the other stuff to you all and did discuss those.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do going forward is, Glenn, you'll do a review. I think we do need a red line version so that we can see what it is, and then we can do an accepted version to send out afterwards. And then, Liz, you're going to be working on the formerly residential, now tree list for us.
Mayor, I have a question about that in
yeah.
terms of the redlining. Are the things that are already in here as redline that we agreed to today, those can get accepted?
Correct.
But for minor changes like the word residential for tree list or some other minor word adjustments, do you want to see those in redline in the final, or are we only talking about the areas that are where we have some rewrites, and we do have some of those?
I would say for completeness, just go ahead and we'll do everything as red line.
Okay.
And then again, we'll do an accepted version also that accepts it all. Now, Glenn, when you do this, we're looking for your legal review. So you may wordsmith or check syntax or whatever, but also, would you combine that with codifying this, putting it into ordinance form? Okay. And,
This will be relatively easy because it's not going to be a lengthy ordinance that has markouts and underlines, and this will just be replace current chapter 253 with the following new
right,
chapter
right,
253.
okay. All righty, I think we've about exhausted it for the day. Anything else good to the order, anybody? Anybody, last chance, anybody up here? Oh, I wasn't quick enough.
No, Carolyn Diefendorfer, I just want to thank Commissioner Gay for all her efforts on this.
Yes.
This
she's-
was amazing. You did a great job. You're welcome.
Great job. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for all your input too. Liz, thank you for attending today. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting at 11:38 a.m. Thank you very much.